The morning that ruined Princess Elara of Aldenmoor began, as most terrible mornings do, in absolute silence. She was standing at the tall arched window of her chambers, watching the fog lift from the valley below, when she heard the footsteps of her handmaiden Sola approaching with the particular speed that meant news. Elara had long since learned to read the cadence of footsteps the way sailors read the sky. Fast and light, something had arrived. Heavy and slow, someone had died. Sola's steps were fast and light that morning, yet Elara did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the valley, on the silver thread of the river Aldenmoor wound through the hills below the palace like a vein of something living, something that carried the heartbeat of the kingdom she had grown up loving with every part of herself. She was 23 years old, and had never left this kingdom. She had never wanted to. "Your Highness." Sola's voice was careful, the tone of someone delivering a wrapped thing that might contain something sharp. "The king requests your presence. There is a letter. From the kingdom of Romavane." Elara closed her eyes. She had heard that name before, in the way one hears a distant thunder, far off enough to dismiss. Romavane. A kingdom to the north, beyond the great mountain ridge that divided the continent like a scar. Powerful, ancient, and ruled, she knew, by King Aldric the Elder, whose son and heir had just reached the age of marriage. She turned from the window. Her father, King Doran of Aldenmoor, was seated at the long oak table of his council chamber when she arrived. He was a broad man, thick through the chest, with a beard that had gone white long before his hair, and eyes the pale gray-blue of winter sky, eyes that Elara had inherited exactly. He held the letter loosely in one hand, but she could see the careful way his fingers held the paper, the reverence in his grip. He was trying to appear casual and failing. "Close the door, Elara." She closed it. She did not sit. "King Aldric has written," her father said, setting the letter on the table between them as though it were a piece of evidence. "His son, Prince Caelan of Romavane, is of age. He is to be betrothed. Aldric has chosen you." The words did not land immediately. They floated, brief and strange, like dust motes in the shaft of light coming through the high window. Then they settled. "He has chosen me," Elara repeated. Not a question. A clarification, as though saying it plainly might make it reveal its absurdity. "It is an extraordinary honor," her father said, and she heard the layered thing beneath those words. The relief of a king whose treasury was thin after 2 hard winters, whose military alliance with the north had been fraying, whose daughter happened to be, in this moment, the most useful currency he possessed. She heard it, and it made her love him less and pity him more, and both of those things made her chest ache. "I have never met him," she said. "No. You would meet him at the formal introduction, 3 months from." "Father." She pressed her palms flat on the table. "I have never met him. No one I trust has met him. I know nothing about him except that his kingdom lies beyond a mountain range I have never crossed, and that he is looking for a wife the way one looks for a suitable piece of furniture." King Doran's jaw tightened. He loved her. She had always known that. But love, in kings, was a complicated thing. It lived beside duty, and duty was a much larger thing, and when they collided it was always love that was asked to step aside. "You are a princess of a royal house," he said quietly. "This is the nature of our lives." "It does not have to be," she said. "Or at least, it does not have to happen like this. In blindness. I am not asking to refuse. I am asking to know." He looked at her for a long moment. The window light moved across his face, and for just a second he looked old in a way that frightened her. Not old like wisdom, but old like a man who had made many compromises and was no longer sure which of them he regretted. "You will go to Romavane in the spring," he said. "The formal introduction will be arranged. You will meet Prince Caelan under the proper conditions, in the proper way. And if he is a terrible person?" Silence spread through the chamber like water through a crack. "Then you will manage it with grace," her father said, "as royal women have always done." Elara straightened. She looked at her father, at the letter, at the seal of Romavane pressed into dark wax on the table between them. A crowned wolf, she noticed. A crowned wolf, eating something she could not quite make out. She curtsied. She left the room. She did not sleep that night. Sola found her at midnight, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the palace library, with every map of the northern kingdoms spread around her like the petals of some vast paper flower. Elara had lit 3 candles and arranged them in a triangle, the way her old tutor had taught her to read by when she was a child. "One for each side of a question," he used to say. "One for what you know. One for what you don't. One for what you're afraid to find out." Sola sat down across from her without being asked. This was one of the many reasons Elara loved her. What do people say of Prince Caelan? Elara asked without looking up from the map. Sola was quiet for a moment. In the candle light, her dark face was very still, the way it got when she was weighing what to say. People say many things, Sola said carefully. He is young, 3 years older than you. He completed his military training with distinction. He is said to be, difficult, private, demanding of those in his service. Difficult, Elara echoed. There are worse things. There are also worse things than difficult, Elara said. The words difficult and cruel begin with entirely different letters, and yet people use them interchangeably when describing powerful men. Sola was quiet again. She pulled the largest map toward her, the one that showed all of the northern continent, with Romavane marked in the upper left corner, and Aldenmoor in the lower right, separated by the spine of the Greywall Mountains. You are thinking about going, Sola said. Not a question. Elara looked up. I am thinking about knowing, Elara said. Those are different things. Or at least, they start differently. She tapped the map, her finger on Romavane. 3 weeks of travel on the northern road over the Greywall Pass. If someone were to go in advance of the formal delegation, in a way that would not be announced, in a way that would allow them to see things as they truly are, rather than as they are dressed to appear for a visiting princess. Sola stared at her. You want to go undercover, Sola said. Into Romavane. Into the palace of the prince you are supposed to marry. As a maid, Elara said. Palace maids are always wanted. I know how to work. I know how to be invisible. And I know how to watch. You also know how to be recognized as the Princess of Aldenmoor, Sola said, her voice very flat. Because you are one, and your face has been on diplomatic portraits. Diplomatic portraits flatter. They smooth. They make one look like a painting instead of a person. Elara touched her own cheek. Cut my hair. Give me servants' clothes and calloused work and the kind of eyes that look at the floor. No one will look at a maid and see a princess. They never do. The candles flickered between them. This is the most dangerous plan you have ever had, Sola said. And you once tried to climb the south tower during a rainstorm to rescue a sparrow. The sparrow survived. You broke your wrist. Elara smiled, not the diplomatic smile she wore at state functions, the careful, calibrated warmth, but the real one, the one that came from somewhere deeper. The one that reminded her, whenever she caught it in a mirror, that she was still a person and not just a title. Help me plan it, she said. You are the cleverest person I know. Sola looked at the map for a long moment. Then she pulled it closer. You will need a name, she said. Not your own. And so, in the orange pool of 3 candles, in the library of a palace she loved and might never see again in the same way, Princess Elara of Aldenmoor became someone else. She chose the name Lena. Plain. Common. A name that would not attract interest. A name that ended quietly, without ceremony, the way a sentence ends when it has nothing important left to say. She had no idea, sitting cross-legged on that library floor, that it would become the most important name she would ever wear. Chapter 2. The Road North. She cut her own hair. This was not, as it turned out, as dramatic as she had feared. She had expected grief. Her hair was long, the color of dark amber, and she had worn it braided since she was a child. But when she sat before the small copper mirror in the servants' quarters of a roadside inn on the first night of her journey north and drew the shears through the first long braid, what she felt was not grief at all. It was something lighter, something almost like relief. She left the braids on the floor and looked at the person in the mirror. The hair fell just below her jaw now. Without its weight, her face looked different, younger in some ways, older in others. Her cheekbones were sharper. Her eyes, always her most distinctive feature, pale gray with a ring of gold near the center, eyes that people tended to remember, were still herself, still entirely herself. That, she could not change. So she would have to rely on the fact that the eyes of a servant, downcast and still, rarely matched the memory of a princess in a portrait. She had left Aldenmoor 3 days ago. The departure had been a kind of quiet violence, slipping out of the east gate before dawn, dressed in the grey wool of a common traveller, with a letter of introduction that Sola had spent 2 nights forging and a modest amount of coin sewn into the lining of her cloak. Her father would discover she was gone by midday of that first day. Sola would tell him, they had agreed on this, that she had gone willingly, that she was safe, that she would return before the formal delegation was sent. What Sola would not tell him, because they had agreed on this too, was where she had gone. The road north was long and cold and beautiful in the particular way of things that have never been asked to be beautiful. The mountains rising above the pass like an argument interrupted mid-sentence, the air thinning as she climbed so that every breath tasted of cold stone and sky. She traveled by horse to the pass, then by cat with a family of cloth merchants who were headed to the northern markets and who asked no questions because they recognized in her something they respected, the posture of someone who had already decided everything and was only waiting for the world to catch up. She used the 3 weeks of travel to become Lena. She practiced speaking without the particular precision of royal diction, the measured vowels, the careful pauses. She learned to round her words, to swallow her consonants slightly, to let sentences end on the upswing the way common people did when they were not used to their statements being taken as commands. She practiced moving differently, smaller, softer, the inward posture of someone accustomed to making themselves convenient rather than visible. She practiced looking at the floor. This last part was the hardest. Elara had been raised to look people in the eye. Her father had drilled it into her from the time she could walk. The world takes the measure of you from your gaze, he used to say. Give them a clear view. But princesses looked the world in the eye because they could afford to. Maids looked at the flaw because they could not. So she practiced this, too, the downward gaze, the learned smallness, the art of being present without taking up space. She was a fast learner. She had always been a fast learner. This was, perhaps, one of the few useful inheritances of her royal education. The kingdom of Romavane arrived the way kingdoms do when you approach them from the outside, gradually, then all at once. There were markers first, the crown wolf emblem carved into stone posts along the road, the language shifting from the soft vowels of the central tongue to the clipped northern dialect she had been practicing. The villages grew denser. The farms gave way to market towns. The market towns gave way to the outer city of Varenhal, which was the seat of the Romavane crown and the place where the palace sat on its hill above everything, visible from 20 miles in any direction. A statement of power so settled and so ancient that it had stopped being aggressive and had simply become fact. Elara stood at the base of the city and looked up at it. The palace was vast. That was the only word for it. Not elegant vast, not intimidating vast, but simply enormous in the way of things built not to impress but to endure. Dark stone, narrow windows, towers that did not taper but simply stopped, blunt and certain, against the grey sky. It was the architecture of a people who had never needed to announce themselves because the announcement had been made centuries ago and had never since been questioned. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Well then, she said quietly to herself. Here we are. The letter of introduction Sola had forged was exquisite, a recommendation from a lord of the southern provinces, noting that a young woman named Lena of Karath was skilled, trustworthy, and in need of placement. The palace employment office was a small, cool room just inside the service entrance, staffed by a woman of middle age with the particular expression of someone who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She read Sola's letter. She looked at Elara, at Lena, with the assessing gaze of a person whose entire professional purpose was to see past surfaces. Elara looked at the floor. What can you do? The woman asked. Clean, cook, serve, Lena said. I am quiet. I do not gossip. I am not afraid of hard work. A pause. What was your previous position? I served in a lord's household in the south. He died. The estate was sold. I needed a new placement. Another pause. The woman tapped the letter against the desk. We have a position in the upper household, she said. Upper wing, east corridor. Meaning you will be in proximity to the family's private quarters. That requires exceptional discretion. I understand, Lena said. You will report to the head of household, Mistress Vora. You will follow her instructions exactly. You will not speak unless spoken to in areas of the private wing. You will not look at. The woman paused, and Elara understood this pause. Certain members of the household directly unless addressed. I understand, Lena said again. The employment woman studied her for one final moment, one last searching look, the kind that Elara had prepared for and was now very afraid of. Then the woman looked back down at her ledger and made a notation. Welcome to the palace of Romavane, she said, with the enthusiasm of someone welcoming a piece of furniture to a room. Lena curtsied. She followed the young maid who appeared to show her to her quarters. She had made it in. She had absolutely no idea what she was walking into. Chapter 3, The Prince of Silence. She heard him before she saw him. This was, she would later learn, how most people experienced Prince Caelan of Romavane for the first time. Not through his appearance, though that was striking enough, she would discover, but through his effect. The way a room changed when he entered it. The way sound pulled back from him, the way water pulls back from a stone dropped into still water. That immediate, reflexive retreat. Elara, Lena, had been at the palace for exactly 3 days when it happened. She was on her knees in the east corridor, polishing the baseboards with the particular devotion of someone who had never polished a baseboard in her life and was determined not to let that show. She had her hair tucked under the white cloth cap all the palace maids wore. Her back was aching. Her knees were aching. She was thinking, with great unroyal concentration, about how she had spent the last 3 days learning the exact temperature at which beeswax polish had to be applied to achieve the desired shine, and wondering if this specific knowledge could possibly serve any future diplomatic purpose. Then the footsteps came. She heard them from the far end of the corridor, measured, even, unhurried. The kind of footsteps that did not hurry because they had never had reason to. Ahead of them came a maid named Petra, moving in the quick, nervously efficient way that Elara had already noticed was specific to the upper household staff when they knew who was approaching. "Stand up," Petra hissed, appearing at her shoulder. "Stand up and move to the side, against the wall. Now." Lena rose and pressed herself to the wall. Petra did the same, both of them facing forward, eyes down. The footsteps slowed, stopped. There was a silence that had weight to it, the particular silence of someone looking at something. "The baseboards in this section are still dull," a voice said. It was a quiet voice. That was the first thing Elara noticed. Not loud, not theatrical, not the voice of a man performing authority. Just a voice, flat and certain, the way a wall is flat and certain, not aggressive, simply there, simply factual, brooking no argument because it had not occurred to it that arguments existed. Petra made a sound. It was the sound of a person trying to respond who has forgotten how language works. "The new girl was assigned to this section this morning, my lord," Petra said, in a near whisper. Another silence. Elara kept her eyes on the floor. She was aware, with the particular, very uncomfortable awareness of prey, that the silence had shifted direction and was now aimed at her. "You," the voice said. She did not look up. "Yes, my lord," she said, in Lena's voice, soft, round, careful. "The baseboards in this section have been done incorrectly. The wax has been applied too cold. It is streaking." A pause. "It will be corrected, my lord." Another pause, longer. She felt the weight of it on the top of her head. "See that it is. Today." The footsteps resumed and moved away. Elara did not let out her breath until they had gone entirely. Then she let it out very slowly, in the careful way of a person who has just realized they were holding it. Beside her, Petra was already moving, efficiently, without drama, pulling polish from her apron pocket. "That was him," Petra said, without looking at Elara. Not a question. "Yes," Elara said. "I gathered." Petra glanced at her sideways. There was something in that glance, not quite pity, but something adjacent. The look of someone who had been somewhere for a long time and recognized the expression on a new arrival. "He is not always like that," Petra said. Elara waited. "He is sometimes worse," Petra said, and turned back to her work. She saw him fully for the first time 2 days later. She was carrying linens through the upper hall, a wide, stone-flagged passage that connected the family's private chambers to the council wing, when she came around a corner and found herself walking directly toward him. There was nowhere to step aside. The corridor was too narrow. She stopped and pressed herself to the wall and looked at the floor, the way she had been taught. He was tall. She registered this without looking up, the shadow of him, the particular geometry of his approaching footsteps. When he passed her, she was close enough to see his hands, long-fingered, ringed with one piece of dark metal on the right hand, and the hem of his coat, deep gray wool, severe cut, no ornamentation. He did not acknowledge her. She was beginning to understand that this was not rudeness, exactly. Not the deliberate kind. He simply did not see her. She was furniture, part of the palace's working body, as much a part of the environment as the floor or the wall or the particular quality of light through the north-facing windows. He moved through the space that the palace provided for him with the absolute unself-consciousness of a person who had never had to notice the machinery that kept his life running. She had taken 2 steps away from the wall when his voice stopped her. "Those linens are for the east guest chamber." She turned. He had not stopped walking. He was already several paces away, and he had not looked back at her. "Yes, my lord. The east guest chamber is closed until the ambassadors visit next month. Take them to storage." He rounded the corner and was gone. She stood holding the linens in the empty corridor and turned the interaction over in her mind the way one turns over a stone to look at the underside. He had not looked at her. He had not addressed her. He had simply stated a fact about a room and what should happen with fabric, in the same tone one might state the weather forecast, and had continued walking. This, she was learning, was Prince Caelan of Romavane. Not theatrical cruelty. Not the performed arrogance of the small-souled nobility she had encountered at her own father's court, men who needed an audience for their contempt. This was something stranger, something colder. The absolute, seamless sense that the people around him were functional, not human, that they existed to ensure the smooth operation of his day, and that the smooth operation of his day was the natural and correct purpose of the world. And she was supposed to marry this man. The thought sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong. She took the linens to storage. Chapter 4, Lord Emric. She met Lord Emric Vane on a Thursday, in the palace kitchens, over a spilled pot of soup. It was her fault. She had been carrying a tray through the kitchen corridor when she rounded a corner too fast, and the person coming from the opposite direction had rounded it equally fast, and the result was a catastrophic meeting of tray, an elbow that sent a full pot of the afternoon's lamb broth cascading in a wide, steaming arc across the stone floor, and across the front of a very expensive-looking dark blue coat. She froze. In the 3 weeks she had been at the palace, she had become fluent in the particular calculus of disaster that governed servant life. There was a hierarchy of consequences, and spilling soup on a noble was very near the top of it. She prepared, with the sick certainty of someone very familiar with consequences, to be dismissed, or screamed at, or both. Instead, the man looked down at his coat, looked at her, and then, in a manner so unexpected that it took her a moment to process it, laughed. It was a good laugh. Surprised and genuine, the kind that comes out before a person's dignity has had time to intervene. "Well," he said, "that is one way to introduce yourself." She stared at him before she remembered to look at the floor. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with the kind of face that is not conventionally beautiful, but that one tends to keep looking at anyway. Broad forehead, dark eyes, a mouth set in an expression of perpetual mild amusement. He was tall, though not so tall as the prince, and where the prince wore his authority like a natural growth, this man wore his like something he had put on thoughtfully and kept adjusting. "I'm so sorry, my lord," she managed. "I will have the coat cleaned." "It's soup," he said. "The coat has survived worse. Are you all right?" She looked up without meaning to. He was looking at her with genuine inquiry, not the performative concern of a man who wanted to be seen being gracious, but actual, straightforward curiosity about whether she was all right. It was such a simple question, and yet the plainness of it, from a man of his rank in this palace, after 3 weeks of carefully performed invisibility, it undid her, just slightly at the seams. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm very sorry." "Stop apologizing," he said pleasantly. "I've startled people half to death in that corner myself. The turn is too sharp. I've told the household steward for years." He looked at the soup spreading slowly across the floor. "I'll send someone for this. You go and get your tray sorted." She curtsied and began to move away. "What's your name?" he asked. She stopped. "Lena, my lord." "I'm Emric," he said. "Lord Emric Vane, if you're being formal. The king's first counselor, if you're being official. But mostly just Emric, which I prefer." She did not know what to do with this information. She curtsied again, uncertain. He smiled. It was a kind smile, the kind that did not require anything of you. "Careful at the corners, Lena," he said, and continued on his way. She learned about Emric Vane in layers, the way one learns about anyone in a place where information travels slowly through the careful, sideways economy of servant gossip. He was not, as she had half assumed, simply a courtier of convenient birth. He was the son of the king's oldest friend, a man who had served King Aldric for 30 years and died in service 5 years ago, leaving his son to step into a role that was less an appointment than an inheritance. Emric had grown up in this palace. He and Prince Caelan were 3 years apart in age, and they had been raised together from boyhood, had shared tutors, had trained together, had eaten at the same table more often than not throughout their childhood. The friendship, as Elara gathered it from careful listening, was the great puzzle of the palace's inner life. Because the two men were, in almost every observable way, opposites. The prince, private, commanding, cold. The lord, open, warm, easy in his own skin. The prince who could clear a room simply by entering it. The lord who could warm a room the same way. And yet they were inseparable, had been for 20-odd years, and the people of the palace spoke of their bond with the particular careful reverence of something they didn't entirely understand but recognized as fundamental, the way one recognizes the structural weight of a wall without knowing much about architecture. What Elara could see, in the days that followed her accidental meeting, was simpler than any of this. Lord Emric Vane was a genuinely good man. In a palace full of people performing goodness to various degrees, he was one of those rare individuals who appeared to be good without effort, without calculation, without an audience. She watched him the way she watched everything in this palace, carefully, systematically, with the disciplined attention of someone who had come here for information, and she could not find the performance. He was patient with people. He was curious about them. He remembered names. He asked questions and listened to the answers with his whole face, in the way of someone for whom other people's inner lives were genuinely interesting rather than strategically useful. She found this, after 3 weeks in the cold architecture of Caelan's palace, almost startlingly strange. Strange, and then gradually against her better judgment, not strange at all. It was Emric who saved her job. It happened in the 4th week. She had been assigned to the prince's study, to clean it during the morning hours when he was at council. She had been efficient, careful, invisible in the way she had become very good at being. She had just finished and was arranging the books that had been moved from their places. She'd noted carefully where they had been, replaced them exactly, when the prince arrived early. She was still holding one of the books. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her, at the book in her hands. The book was a treatise on military history. She had been holding it for perhaps 3 seconds, her thumb on the spine, not reading it, simply holding it. But from his position in the doorway it might have appeared otherwise. His expression did not change. It never changed, she was learning. But the quality of his stillness changed. "That book does not belong to you," he said. "I was returning it to the shelf, my lord." She placed it on the shelf immediately, at the correct position. "I apologize for being here when you returned. I was told the council sat until midday. Do not explain yourself to me. When you are done with the study, you leave it. You do not remain when I am not present." She looked at the floor. Something hot moved through her chest, not quite anger, but its quiet, banked cousin. The kind that learns to breathe slowly. "Caelan." Lord Emric's voice came from the corridor, easy, unhurried. He appeared behind the prince in the doorway. He looked at the room, at the maid, at his old friend's face, and his eyes did a kind of quick, practiced reading that Elara suspected he had been doing for 20 years. "Council let out early," he said to the prince. "The ambassador from the coast sent a messenger. I need to speak with you about," he glanced at Elara, "this other matter. After she finishes." A pause. The prince's attention shifted from Elara to Emric, just slightly, a shift of weight. "She is finished," the prince said, and walked past both of them into the study. Emric stepped aside to let Elara pass. As she did, he spoke quietly, for her ears only. "He reads when the council frustrates him," Emric said. "He was not meant to be back this early. That is not your fault." She looked at him, just briefly, just long enough to meet his eyes, which were calm and direct and carried, she thought, an apology that he was extending on behalf of someone who would never give one himself. "Thank you, my lord," she said. She left. In the corridor, she pressed her back against the cool stone and let herself breathe. She was not going to be dismissed today. She had Emric Vane to thank for that, and she did not yet know why that small mercy, that quiet, easy intercession from a man who owed her nothing, made her eyes sting the way they did briefly, before she blinked it away and straightened and went back to her work. She looked at him, just briefly, just long enough to meet his eyes, which were calm and direct and carried, she thought, an apology that he was extending on behalf of someone who would never give one himself. "Thank you, my lord," she said. She left. In the corridor, she pressed her back against the cool stone and let herself breathe. She was not going to be dismissed today. She had Emric Vane to thank for that, and she did not yet know why that small mercy, that quiet, easy intercession from a man who owed her nothing, made her eyes sting the way they did, briefly, before she blinked it away and straightened and went back to her work. The first time she argued back, she had not intended to. It came out of her before she could stop it, the way things come out when they have been contained too long, and the container develops a crack. She had been in the palace for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of watching. 6 weeks of learning. 6 weeks of Prince Caelan of Romavane moving through his palace like weather, inevitable, unremarkable to itself, and exhausting to everything in its path. She had collected observations the way one collects evidence. He rose before the sun, and was dressed and at his desk before the palace staff began their morning rounds. He ate without apparent pleasure, as though sustenance were an administrative function. He spoke to his counsel with a precision that she had to admit, privately, was impressive. Not the showmanship of a man who liked the sound of his own voice, but the efficiency of someone who had decided what needed to happen and expected everyone else to align with that decision without unnecessary detours through the territory of their own opinions. He was also, and this was the thing she could not excuse, could not file under efficiency or privacy or the learned coldness of royal upbringing, cruel to his staff. Not in the theatrical way, not with shouts or humiliation or the degrading inventiveness of genuinely small people. He was cruel the way a very cold room is cruel, not through intent, but through complete and total indifference to your comfort. He corrected without context, instructed without warmth, and dismissed, in every sense of the word, without acknowledgement that the person being dismissed was a person. She had watched Petra flinch, countless times, at the sound of footsteps in the corridor. She had watched 3 other maids cry in the linen room after a direct encounter with the prince's particular brand of correction. She had watched a young footman named Corey spend an entire afternoon redoing a task because the first attempt had been met with one word, again, and no further explanation of what had been wrong with it. She had contained all of this. She was very good at containing things. And then, on a gray Tuesday morning, 6 weeks in, she carried Prince Caelan's morning correspondence to his study and set it on the desk, and he looked at the arrangement and said, in that flat, factual voice, "This is out of order." She looked at the letters. She had arranged them in the order she had been taught, by sender rank, then by seal date, which was the order Mistress Vora had explicitly instructed her to use 2 weeks ago, and the order she had used every morning since without comment. "They are arranged by rank and date, my lord," she said, "as Mistress Vora instructed." "Mistress Vora does not read my correspondence." "I do. I read by urgency, not by rank. Rank tells me where something came from. Urgency tells me what requires my attention." A pause. She looked at the letters. "I was not told the order had changed, my lord." "If you would." "I did not say the order had changed. I said this order is incorrect." The hot thing in her chest flared. "With respect, my lord," she heard herself say, in a voice that was absolutely Lena's voice but was carrying something very much like Elara's backbone, "I cannot arrange correspondence by urgency unless someone tells me what the urgent matters are. I do not read your correspondence, properly so. If you would like me to sort it differently, I would need some indication of your priorities. Otherwise, I am arranging by the criteria I was given." The silence that followed was of a different quality than his other silences. He turned from the window. He had been standing at it, which she had not realized, which meant he had been looking at the letters from across the room, which meant he had assessed their order from 10 feet away and found them wanting, which meant he was paying a degree of attention to details of his household that most men of his station delegated entirely, and she did not know what to do with that observation. He looked at her. She looked at the letters, but she did not retract what she had said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to the desk, picked up the first letter, and said, without looking at her, "The red seal is from the Southern Military Command. That is always urgent. The blue seal is from my father's personal correspondence. Also urgent. The plain white envelope is from the Trade Council. It is never urgent, regardless of what they believe." He set the letter down. "Tomorrow arrange it in that order," he said. "Red, blue, plain white. Other seals by their color after that." He sat down and opened the red-sealed letter. She stood for a moment, very still. Then she gathered the previous arrangement, rearranged it quickly by his stated priority, set it back on the desk, and left. In the corridor, she stopped and pressed her hands against her thighs and breathed. He had not apologized. He had not acknowledged that the fault was not hers. He had simply explained his system, having apparently decided that explanation was more useful than accountability. And yet, she turned this over carefully, the way she turned over all things he had explained. He had given her the information she had pointed out she needed. He had not dismissed her. He had not raised his voice. He had not called for Mistress Vora to reprimand her for speaking out of turn. He had simply explained himself, as though her point had been logical and required a logical response. She stood in the corridor for a long time, trying to decide how she felt about this. She could not quite decide. Chapter 6. What the King Noticed. King Aldric of Romavane was not what she had expected. She had expected, from the sun, from the palace's particular emotional temperature, a king who ruled by volume and certainty. She had imagined someone thunderous, someone whose authority was performed loudly, so that no one would be left uncertain about who held power in this kingdom. King Aldric was not thunderous. He was a man of 60-some years, silver-haired and heavier than his portraits suggested, with reading spectacles that he wore pushed up on his forehead, more often than on his face, and a manner of speaking that was always slightly slower than the conversation required, as though he was in no hurry and expected the conversation to wait for him. He was almost nothing like his son. He had warmth, not the easy, democratic warmth of Lord Emric, but a deep, considered warmth, the warmth of a man who had decided long ago what mattered and arranged his personality accordingly. He was also, and this was what surprised her most, enormously observant. The first time she served in the dining room during one of his informal evening meals, the ones he ate with his son and Lord Emric without the full court, she was aware of his gaze on her. Not the assessing gaze of the employment officer. Something quieter and more patient. The gaze of a man who was interested in people and not yet sure what kind of person he was looking at. She said nothing. She served. She was invisible in the way she had become very good at being. But that evening, passing through the outer hall on her way to the kitchens, she rounded the corner and almost walked into King Aldric, who was standing alone in the corridor in his evening clothes with a glass of something in his hand and the meditative expression of a man who has chosen not to go to bed yet and is not sure what to do with the time. She curtsied deeply immediately. "You are the new girl," he said, not unkindly. "Yes, Your Majesty. Lena, I have been here 7 weeks. 7 weeks." He said it slowly, as though testing the weight of it. "Where are you from?" She gave the answer she had prepared. "The South, Your Majesty. A lord's household near the Aldenmoor border." She said it smoothly. The Aldenmoor border. The kingdom she had come from. The word slid out of her like all the other cover words, practiced, perfectly ordinary. King Aldric said nothing for a moment. "My son," he said eventually, "is not easy to work for." She kept her eyes down. "He has high standards, Your Majesty." A pause. Then, with what she could only identify as a very slight warmth. "That is a diplomatic answer. I try to be useful, Your Majesty." He looked at her for another moment, with that patient, thorough look. "I heard you spoke back to him last week. About the correspondence." She went very still. She had not known he heard about that. "I apologize if—" "I didn't say it was wrong," the king said. He took a sip of his drink. "I said I heard it. What you said was correct. The arrangement made no sense without the context. You asked for the context. That is not insubordination. That is competence." A pause. "Most people who work for my son stop being competent within a month and simply start being afraid. You appear to be neither." She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. "Good night, Lena," the king said, and moved away down the corridor. She stood in the corridor for a long time after he'd gone. 7 weeks in, and the king had noticed her. The king, this kind, sharp, surprisingly warm old man who was nothing like his son, had noticed her, had assessed her, had, apparently, decided she was not a threat, and Lord Emric had been watching out for her. And the prince looked at her the way he looked at the furniture. She was, she thought, building an unexpectedly complex picture of this family. She pulled her shawl tighter and went back to the kitchens. Chapter 7, The Slow Friendship. It happened in small increments, the way most real things happen. The first time Lord Emric sought her out deliberately, not by accident, not in passing, but specifically on purpose, was on a Wednesday afternoon in the 8th week, when she was in the east garden cutting back the last of the autumn growth on the rose bushes. It was cold work. Her hands were going numb through her gloves, and she was thinking, with a deep and philosophical sadness, about every warm thing she had ever owned and not appreciated. She heard his footsteps on the path. She recognized them now, had learned the footfalls of everyone in the upper household the way sailors learn the sounds of a ship. Emric walked the way he did everything, unhurried but purposeful, like someone who has somewhere to go but is interested in the journey. He stopped beside the rose bush she was working on and looked at it with the expression of a man making polite conversation with someone's hobby. "These have been here since before I was born," he said. "They show it," she said, and then added, "My lord, a beat too late." He smiled. "Just Emric. Truly, it makes me feel ceremonial, and I have enough ceremony in my life already." He crouched down on the path beside her, actually crouched in his good coat in the dirt, and looked at the root system of the bush. "My mother used to tend this garden." She glanced at him sideways. "She died," he said, without particular drama, "when I was young, before my father. So the king and the garden both sort of adopted me. He picked up a fallen leaf and turned it over in his fingers. I've always been more comfortable in this palace than anyone expected me to be. It seems to fit you, she said, before she could stop herself. He looked at her. His eyes were very direct, the kind of eyes that did not look through you or past you but simply at you, as though you were the specific thing they had decided to pay attention to. The palace fits Caelan better, he said. He grew into it. I just settled into the corners he doesn't use. A pause. You are not afraid of him. It was not a question. I try to be useful, she said carefully. Fear is not particularly useful. Emric was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he is not what he appears to be. She kept cutting. The shears bit through dry stems. Most people aren't. No, he said, but with Caelan there is a larger gap than most, between what he appears to be and what he actually is. He stood, brushing the dirt from his coat with the unconcerned air of someone who does not think very much about his coat. I've spent 20 years watching people form conclusions about him in the first 5 minutes, and carry those conclusions forever. It is, he searched for the word, frustrating, as an exercise in the limitations of first impressions. She looked up at him, just briefly. And you are telling me this because you have been here 8 weeks, he said, and you are still looking. Still actually looking. Most people stop. She did not know what to say to that. She went back to the roses. Emric left. But he came back the next day, and the day after that, not for any administrative reason, not in passing, but simply to sit in the garden while she worked and to talk. About small things at first, the roses, the weather, the odd mechanics of palace life. Then larger things. He asked her questions, real ones, questions that required actual thought to answer, and he listened to the answers with that particular undivided attention that she was learning was his great and distinctive gift. He laughed easily and without self-consciousness. He disagreed with her about several things and said so clearly, without aggression, which she found deeply refreshing. She was careful. She was always careful, careful not to reveal too much, careful to remain Lena in the ways that mattered, careful to remember that she was here for information and not for friendship. And yet she found, in those garden afternoons, something that surprised her. Not romance, she was very clear with herself about this. There was no quickening of the pulse, no warmth that meant anything beyond gratitude. But there was a kinship that she had not expected and that she valued, suddenly and completely, in the way one values a fire found unexpectedly in a cold room. He was kind. He was intelligent. He treated her, from the very first conversation, as a person of worth and not a function of the household. She had missed being treated that way. She had not known how much, until it happened again. She also noticed, and this she filed carefully away, as she filed everything, that Emric spoke about Caelan often. Not always, not obsessively, but with the particular precision of someone who had spent 2 decades studying a person and had formed opinions about them that were considered and specific and different from anyone else's opinions on the subject. He is not cruel, Emric said once, on a Thursday afternoon in the 10th week, when she had asked him something carefully indirect about the prince's management of his staff. I know he seems it, but cruelty requires you to care enough about someone's pain to derive satisfaction from it. Caelan doesn't. He frowned, searching. He doesn't see people the way most people do. He sees functions. He sees purposes. It is a flaw. I am not excusing it, but it comes from a place that is not malice. It comes from how he was raised and from what he has taught himself to value. He stopped. He has never learned, she finished quietly, that functions are performed by people, and that people are not only their functions. Emric looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. That. Exactly that. A pause. You think clearly. I listen well, she said. It's the same thing mostly, he said. They sat in comfortable quiet. The autumn wind moved through the roses. Somewhere in the palace above them, a door opened and closed with the heavy sound of old stone and iron hinges. She was building a picture of Prince Caelan of Romavane. And the picture was becoming, against every expectation, more complicated than she had imagined it would be. Chapter 8. The Night of the Storm. The storm came in the 11th week, off the northern sea, and it came the way the north storms always came. Without warning, without apology, in the way of forces that do not consider themselves answerable to the plans of people. By nightfall the palace was sealed, shutters drawn, fires built high, the entire household reduced to the warmth of interior rooms while the wind worked on the exterior. Elara was in the upper hall, retrieving extra blankets from the storage room at the far end, when the lamp she was carrying went out. The darkness was complete. She stood very still. In Aldenmoor, she would have known exactly where to find another light. She had grown up in a palace with exactly this geography of lamps and corridors and dark corners. She did not know this palace in the dark. She had a general sense of the corridor's layout, but between her and the nearest lamplight was a set of stairs, and stairs in the dark were not something she felt philosophical about. She was still deciding what to do when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Prince Caelan was standing at the far end of the corridor with a lamp in his hand. She could see him clearly. He, presumably, could see her not at all. "Who is there?" he said. "Lena, my lord. I was retrieving blankets for the east rooms. My lamp went out." A pause. "Come here." She moved toward the lamplight. He stood and waited, not impatiently, simply still, until she came close enough that his lamp reached her. He looked at the unlit lamp in her hand. Then he extended his own toward her. She understood. She was to light hers from his. She brought the wicks together. The flame caught. She stepped back. They stood in the corridor with two lamps between them, the wind audible beyond the walls, and for a moment, just a moment, neither of them moved. She looked at him properly in the lamplight. She had never been this close, with this much light, for this long. He was looking at the flame of the lamp she'd just lit, with an expression that was not quite what she expected. There was something in it, behind the habitual mask of his stillness, that was tired. Simply tired. The way a person is tired when they are tired not just of the day, but of something more sustained, more bone-deep, than that. "You came from the south," he said. It was not, she registered, the beginning of a conversation. It was more like a statement issued by someone who had been turning a fact over, and had finally decided to release it. "Yes, my lord. Near the Aldenmoor border." Her heartbeat made one deliberate, enormous thud. "Yes, my lord." He was quiet. His gaze did not move from the flame. "I am to meet the Princess of Aldenmoor," he said. "In the spring. A formal introduction. It has been arranged." She said nothing. "I have been told she is intelligent," he said, "and strong-willed." Something shifted in his voice, not warmth, exactly, but a change of temperature. A degree less cold. "These are the only qualities anyone has mentioned, which suggests they are also warning me of something." She was not breathing. "What do people say of her?" he asked. "From the south. Near that border. What is the common opinion?" She thought. She thought of herself, standing in her father's library, surrounded by maps. Standing at the library window, watching the fog. Sitting on the floor at midnight, choosing a name. "People say," she said carefully, "that she is not easily managed. That she has opinions and voices them. That she is perhaps too aware of her own mind for a woman in her position." A pause. "And do people say this disapprovingly?" he asked. She looked at him. He was still looking at the flame. "Some do," she said. "Others think it is the most useful quality a person can have." Another pause. Long. "Emric would say the latter," Caelan said very quietly to the lamp. "Lord Emric is often right," she said. Something happened in his face. The tiniest shift. She would not have seen it if she had not been looking, if she had not spent 11 weeks learning the architecture of his expressions the way she had once learned the maps of kingdoms. The way stillness, in his face, was not blankness but a territory with its own subtle geography. He straightened. The moment, whatever it had been, was over. "Retrieve your blankets," he said, "and stay close to the walls on the stairs. The wind has been shaking the building." He walked away. She stood in the corridor for a long time, with the blankets heavy in her arms and the lamp warm in her hand, and something very new and very uncomfortable beginning, somewhere in the architecture of her carefully ordered feelings, to make itself known. Chapter 9. The Maid and the Prince. After the night of the storm, something changed. Not dramatically. Not in any way she could have pointed to and named. It was more like a shift in the light of a room when a cloud moves. The room is the same room, but it looks different, and you are suddenly aware of things you were not paying attention to before. He still gave his instructions in that flat, certain voice that expected the world to reorganize itself around his decisions. He still moved through the palace like weather. All the staff still flinched slightly in advance of his footsteps, and he still corrected errors with the warmth of a ledger. None of that changed, but he spoke to her differently. Not warmly, not gently, not in any way that might be called, by any reasonable assessment, kind. But differently, with something that was almost, if you were looking for it, closer to engagement. He did not simply issue corrections, Sometimes he issued explanations, brief and clipped, and offered with all the emotional generosity of a man who found emotional generosity extremely inconvenient, but offered nonetheless. He did not look through her. He looked at her, not always, not often, not in a way that anyone else would have noticed. But she noticed. She was beginning, against every intention, to notice a great many things about Caelan of Romavane. She noticed that he woke before the sun not out of discipline, but out of what appeared to be genuine inability to sleep, that she sometimes saw him already at his study window when she came up the east corridor before dawn, standing absolutely still in the dark, looking out at nothing. She noticed that he never ate alone by choice. He ate with Emric, or with his father, or not at all, as though solitude at a table was something he had decided he would not do. She noticed that he was brutal with his own mistakes in a way that went beyond perfectionism into something less healthy, a private, rigorous self-accounting that she recognized because she had seen something like it in the mirror of her own ambition. She noticed the way he looked at Emric when Emric was talking, the slight softening around the eyes, the very particular quality of stillness that was not the stillness of disengagement, but of someone paying attention in the way they only paid attention to things they valued. He loved Emric, in the particular unspoken, completely undemonstrated way of a man who had perhaps never learned the vocabulary for love, and so expressed it entirely in the form of proximity, by keeping his closest friend near him always, by listening to him in a way he listened to no one else, by trusting him as completely as a man who trusted no one could trust anyone. This was, she was realizing, the key to understanding him. Not cruelty, not coldness, but a vast sealed interiority that had no doors for most people, and very few windows, and that Emric had somehow, years ago, found a way inside. She thought about that, in the cold quiet of the winter mornings, as she moved through the routines of her life as Lena. The fight, the real fight, the one that changed everything, happened on a morning in the 12th week. A young maid named Bess had broken one of the prince's study lamps, not through carelessness but through a genuine accident, tripping over the edge of a rug with her arms full. The lamp was glass. The glass was old and expensive. Bess was 20 years old, and had been crying in the linen room for 20 minutes when Elara found her. She had the crying stopped and Bess's face washed, and was in the process of coaching her, quietly, practically, through what to say when she reported the accident, when the word came from Mistress Vora that the prince wanted the maid responsible in his study immediately. Bess went white. Elara made a decision in roughly the time it takes to make a decision you have spent 3 months building toward without knowing it. "I'll come with you," she said. "You can't." "I was in the study when it happened," she said, which was not true, but which was also not a lie in any way that mattered morally. "Come on." Prince Caelan was at his desk when they arrived. He looked at Bess with the particular concentrated attention of someone who is preparing to deliver a verdict. Bess was shaking very slightly, in a way she was clearly trying to control. He began to speak. It was measured and cold, an assessment of the cost of the lamp, the unreliability of staff who could not be trusted to move through a room without destroying it, the basic professional standard of attention required. "My lord." The words were out of her mouth before the thought that produced them had fully completed itself. He stopped. The silence in the room was of an extremely specific quality. "The rug at the east corner of your study has an edge that has been lifting for 2 weeks, she said. "I noted it and reported it to Mistress Vora, and was told it would be seen to. It was not seen to. Bess tripped on it this morning. The lamp was the result of that, not of inattention." She said this in Lena's voice, in Lena's careful soft vowels, but with something beneath the voice that was very much her own. The flat, clear directness of someone who has decided that a thing needs to be said and is saying it. He looked at her. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he looked at Bess. "You may go." Bess went. Quickly. They were alone. "You are telling me," he said, in a voice that was very quiet, "that the fault is with the household maintenance." "I am telling you," she said, "that Bess is 20 years old and conscientious, and has done nothing wrong except trip on a rug that should have been fixed 2 weeks ago, and that she is frightened enough of this room that she would not have told you that herself." A long pause. "And you," he said, "are not frightened." "I try to be useful," she said. "Fear is not useful." She realized as she said it that she had said exactly this to Emric weeks ago in the garden, and she wondered, briefly, if the prince would hear it the same way Emric had. He looked at her for a very long time. Then he turned back to his desk. "Have the rug seen to today," he said, "and replace the lamp from household stores." She curtsied. She left. In the corridor, Bess was waiting, her back against the wall, her face still pale. She looked at Elara with an expression that was too big and too complicated for the narrow hallway. "How did you?" she started. "Go have some tea," Elara said gently. "You're all right now." She went back to her work. But she carried, through the rest of the day, the memory of his voice saying, "You are not frightened," with a quality she did not yet have a word for, something between assessment and recognition, like a man identifying, against his expectations, something he had not thought to look for. Chapter 10. The Women of the Palace. Not everyone in the palace of Romavane was as kind as Emric, or as complicated as the king, or as relentlessly difficult as the prince. There were the others. Elara had understood, from her first days in the upper household, that there was a particular female economy of the palace that operated alongside the official one. Quieter, more lateral, more ruthless in its own way. The maids of the upper household had their own hierarchy, their own alliances, their own precise and complicated map of power that had nothing to do with titles and everything to do with proximity, favor, and information. At the center of it were three women. There was Marta, who was senior among the maids and who had been at the palace for 15 years and who wore her length of service as a personal monarchy. There was Gina, beautiful in a calculated way that suggested it had been planned and maintained rather than arrived at naturally, who had been assigned to the prince's personal household for 3 years and who had, by careful accumulation, positioned herself as indispensable. And there was Lissa, who was the quietest and therefore the most dangerous, the one who watched rather than spoke, who gathered rather than distributed, who kept track of things the way one keeps track of a debt. They had been friendly to her at first. The particular friendly that means we are observing you and have not yet decided what to do about you. And then things had shifted. Elara had not done anything to cause the shift. Or rather, she had done things that were not intended to cause it, but had caused it anyway, the way honest behavior tends to make certain people uncomfortable. She had spoken back to the prince and been kept on. She had spoken to King Aldric directly and been received warmly. She had developed what was visibly a friendship with Lord Emric, who was the most prized source of status in the palace's female hierarchy, and she had developed it not by calculation but by accident, and this, the accidentalness of it, the casualness of it, the way Emric clearly genuinely liked her, was what made Marta's smile go thinner, and Gina's eyes go flatter, and Lissa begin her particular brand of very quiet observation. She was not surprised. She had grown up in a palace. She knew how these economies worked. She was careful. She was always more careful after she understood the danger. But she was not careful enough. Chapter 11. Something he had not expected. Lord Emric came to find her in the garden on a frost-cold morning in the 14th week. She saw his face before he said anything and understood that something had happened. Not a crisis, nothing that required action, but something had shifted in him. He sat down on the stone bench across from where she was working and looked at the dormant roses with the expression of a man who has something to say and is deciding how to say it. She waited. She had learned, in 14 weeks, a great deal about waiting. "Caelan asked about you," he said. She looked up. "Not directly," Emric said. "Not in so many words. But he asked. He asked how the new maid had come to be here, and where I thought she came from, and whether I thought she was content in her position." He looked at the roses. "He has never asked me about a member of the household staff in my entire memory." She was very still. "And how did you answer?" she asked. "I told him you were from the south, a lord's household, that you seemed settled enough." He looked at her. "And then I told him that I thought you were wasted in the position you were in." She stared at him. "Emric." "I meant it," he said simply. "I'm not sure what you are, Lena, but you are not only what you appear to be. I think you know that I know that, and I think you know that I am not going to press you on it." A pause. "I trust you, and I think my judgment in these matters is generally sound." She looked at the frost-stiffened ground. "You are a very remarkable person," she said, "in a way that is extremely inconvenient to my plans." He laughed, his good laugh, the real one. "I take that as a compliment." "It is one," she said. "A genuine one." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "He is looking at you differently." She did not ask who he meant. "He looks at everything differently from everyone else," she said. "Yes," said Emric. "But he doesn't usually look." A pause. "I have known him for 20 years. I know what it looks like when he is paying attention, and when he is not. He is paying attention." The frost made the garden very quiet. Somewhere above the wall, a bird called once, and then was silent. "He is going to meet a princess in the spring," she said. "He is," said Emric, and something in his voice told her he understood every layer of what she had just said, and was choosing, with characteristic gentleness, to leave them all undisturbed. He stood. He looked down at her with that kind, direct face. "Whatever you are doing here, Lena," he said quietly, "I hope it is giving you what you came for." He walked back to the palace. She sat in the frost-cold garden for a long time after he'd gone. She sat with her hands in her lap and the dormant roses around her, and thought about what she had come for, and whether she was still, entirely, sure what that was. She had come for information. She had come to know if this prince was someone she could bear to build a life beside. She had planned to observe and assess and then leave, quietly, before the formal introduction, with a clear view of what she was walking into. She had not planned to come to know him. She had not planned for his complications, for the way the cold architecture of him occasionally, rarely, briefly, never by design, showed gaps, through which something entirely different and entirely unexpected was visible. She had not planned for his father's warmth or Emric's friendship or the particular, uncomfortable reality of being seen, after weeks of calculated invisibility, by people she had come to genuinely respect. She had not planned to feel, somewhere in the honest interior of herself, any softness at all for the man she was supposed to hate. And yet, Chapter 12, What Cannot Be Said. The conversation that she would later think of as the one that changed everything happened in the library. She had not known the prince used the library at night. She had not known anyone use the library at night. It was a quiet room, 3 floors up, with the smell of old paper and the quality of silence that belongs to spaces full of things written by people who are no longer alive. She had been going there, on her evenings off, for 8 weeks. She had been reading. She had allowed herself this one small, purely selfish pleasure. The books she could not take out of the library, read in the armchair by the south window, in the quiet. She was there, in her own clothes, not her maid's uniform, which she hung up on her evenings off and allowed herself to forget, with her shoes off and her legs tucked under her, 3/4 through a history of the northern kingdoms, when the door opened. She was on her feet in seconds. But she was not in uniform. Her hair was loose. Her feet were bare. She was holding a book that anyone in this palace would recognize as belonging to the East collection of the library, which was technically accessible to household staff on their days off, but which no one in the household staff had apparently thought to use, because the look on the prince's face when he saw her was the look of a man who has entered a room expecting to find it empty and discovered it is not. They stood on opposite sides of the library. She waited for the instruction to leave. He looked at the book in her hands. Then he looked at her face, at her hair, loose around her jaw, at her bare feet, at the whole of her, standing in the lamplight of a room she had clearly made entirely her own for the evening. "You can read," he said. It was not a question, nor was it an accusation exactly. It was the tone of someone identifying a fact that reorganizes the context around it. "Yes, my lord," she said. "You are reading a history of the Northern Territories." "Yes." He crossed to the shelves on the opposite wall and pulled out a book. He clearly knew exactly where it was, which meant he came here regularly, which meant she had been in this library on his evenings off for 8 weeks and had, somehow, never crossed paths with him until now. He sat in the chair on the other side of the south window. Not the nearest chair. The one that put the most distance between them that could be managed in the same room. He opened his book. She looked at him. "You may continue," he said, without looking up. She sat back down. She opened her book. She stared at the page. They sat like this for perhaps 20 minutes, 2 people in a library reading, in silence, in the same lamplight. It was the most intimate interaction she had had with him in 3 months, and not a word had been spoken. Then he said, without looking up from his book, "What do you think of Elara of Aldenmoor?" She stopped breathing. "My lord, he is mentioned in your chapter." He gestured at the book in her hands, still without looking. "He is described as a moderate ruler of limited military ambition. I am curious what the common opinion is in the south near his border." She looked at the page. Her father's name in print. The words, she could see them now, moderate ruler. Limited ambition. She thought of her father at the long table with the letter from Romavane in his hand. She thought of his eyes and how tired they were. "He is said to be a good man," she said carefully. "A better father than a king, perhaps. But the people near the border have not suffered under him, and in the history of border territories, that is a record worth acknowledging." Caelan looked up. It was the first time she had been looked at by him, directly, in the full sense, in the 3 months she had been in this palace. Not a glance. Not a passing assessment. An actual look in the lamplight at close range, with whatever it was that lived behind his composure present and slightly, briefly visible. A better father than a king, he repeated. Something moved through his expression. That is a generous qualification. I think kindness in a father is not a failure of kingship, she said. I think it might be a different kind of strength. A pause. You think clearly, he said. It was almost exactly what Emric had said to her, weeks ago in the garden. It landed differently coming from him, more startled somehow. Less comfortable. As though it had surprised him to think it. I had a good education, she said. Maids from lords' households in the south do not typically read histories of the northern territories, he said. The air in the library changed temperature. I am curious about the north, she said. I always have been. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked back at his book. The north is cold, he said, and complicated. So is most of what is worth knowing, she said. He said nothing. But something changed in the quality of his silence, became, if silence could be this, warmer. Just barely. Just enough. She went back to her reading. He went back to his. They stayed in the library until the last lamp burned low. Then he rose, replaced his book on the shelf, and left. He did not say good night. She had not expected him to. But at the door he paused, just briefly, so briefly she might have imagined it, and then continued into the dark corridor. She sat alone in the library, in the last of the lamplight, with the history of the Northern Territories open in her lap and her heart doing something complicated and alarming in her chest, and she thought, I have made a very serious miscalculation. She was not supposed to be feeling anything for this man. She had come here to know him. She had known him, and what she knew was something she had not prepared for, not the monster she had feared, not the cipher she had expected, but a person. A genuine, complicated, sealed and difficult and surprising person. And she was becoming. She pressed her hand against her sternum. She was in very serious trouble. Chapter 13, The Accusation. It was Lissa who moved first. Elara had known it would be Lissa. Lissa who watched. Lissa who gathered. Lissa who had spent 4 months cataloging the specific and apparently unbearable facts of the new Maid. That she had kept her position when 3 others had been dismissed. That King Aldric spoke to her in corridors without anyone having asked him to. That Lord Emric visited the garden where she worked and stayed for hours. That she had argued with the prince directly, twice, and had emerged from both encounters still employed. And most recently, this was the fact that seemed to have broken. The specific equilibrium of whatever patience Lissa possessed. That the prince had been seen, by 2 witnesses, reading in the library on a Tuesday evening, and that the maid named Lena had been there. Elara did not know the exact sequence of events that morning. She knew only the shape of it, the way these things always have a shape that is visible in retrospect, in the way that the design of a trap is obvious once you are standing in it. She had been asked, that morning by Gina, to bring a specific set of documents to the council secretary's office. The request had been phrased helpfully, specifically, with the perfect plausibility of a request designed to be remembered. She had taken the documents, a sealed portfolio she had not opened, because you did not open sealed documents that were not addressed to you, and carried them to the council wing. The documents, it turned out, were not for the council secretary. They were a private correspondence, belonging to the prince. And they were not originals, they were copies made without authorization, the kind of copies that if found in the hands of a palace maid would constitute a crime so specific and so serious that there was a word for it, and the word was espionage. She did not understand what was happening at first. She was in the council wing corridor, realizing that the secretary's office was closed and that the directions she had been given were wrong, when 2 members of the palace guard appeared, with Mistress Vora. And behind Mistress Vora, moving with the contained, furious energy of someone who has been told something and is not yet sure whether to believe it, was Prince Caelan. He looked at her, at the portfolio in her hands. She understood in that moment, with the particular, nauseating clarity of someone watching a door close, exactly what had been done. My lord, she said, and her voice was steady in a way she was immensely grateful for. I was asked to bring this to the council secretary's office by Gina, who is one of the senior maids of the upper household. I was told it was a routine document delivery. I have not opened it. I do not know what is inside. The portfolio, Mistress Vora said, in the stiff voice of someone performing a function they find distasteful, contains copies of 3 private communications from the prince's personal correspondence. Unauthorized copies. It was found on your person in the council wing. I was given it, she said. I did not take it. I did not copy anything. She looked at the prince. He was looking at the portfolio. His face was doing what his face always did, giving her nothing. The absolute, sealed composure that she had spent 4 months learning to read, and that now, in this moment, gave her nothing at all. "My lord," she said, and she let everything she had held back for 4 months come up into her voice. Not pleading, but directness, the real kind, the kind that costs something to use. "I am telling you the truth. Whatever I have been, whatever you may think of me, I am telling you the truth right now. I did not take anything. I was given that portfolio this morning by Gina, and told it was for the secretary. Someone has set me up, and I believe you know me well enough by now to consider that before you decide." The silence lasted a very long time. Then Caelan looked at Mistress Vora. "Escort her to the south wing and hold her there," he said. "I will review the matter. Not dismissal. Not the guards. A review." She breathed. But that evening, in the south wing room where they had put her to wait, Emric came to see her. He looked at her face and then looked at his hands, and she knew before he spoke. "He cannot find against Gina," Emric said quietly. "Gina has a witness, Marta, who says you asked for the portfolio yourself. Asked specifically, by name, for the prince's private correspondence. It is 2 people's word against yours." She sat very still. "And he believes them," she said. Emric was quiet for a long time. "He doesn't know what to believe," Emric said. "He is." A pause that was full of something she recognized as Emric trying very hard to be fair to a man he loved. "He is frightened. Of being wrong. Of having," he stopped. "He needs to act. He cannot be seen to have a maid carrying his private correspondence through the council wing and do nothing." "He is going to dismiss me," she said. Emric said nothing. She stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the cold night, at the city below the palace hill, at the lights that went on and on down to the dark distance. She thought of Aldenmoor. She thought of her father at the council table. She thought of the library and the lamplight and the particular quality of a silence she had been fool enough to learn to love. "Can you stop it?" she asked. "I've tried," Emric said. His voice was low and rough and carried something that was very close to grief. "He is." Another pause. "He has made up his mind. Or rather, his mind has been made up for him, and he does not know how to unmake it without appearing to be controlled by a maid," she said. The word fell into the room like a stone. Emric stood up. He came to stand beside her at the window. "I am so sorry," he said. And it was a real apology, not on behalf of anyone, just his own, genuine, felt in the voice that didn't perform anything. "So am I," she said. She was dismissed the next morning. She was given her wages and a letter of non-recommendation and the escort of a single guard to the palace gate, which closed behind her with the heavy, definitive sound of something that had been decided. She did not look back. She walked down the hill of Varenhal with her bag on her shoulder and the winter light flat and gray around her, and she walked until the palace was out of sight behind her and she could no longer hear the sounds of it, and then she stopped on the side of the road and she sat down in the frozen grass and she cried. Quietly, without anyone to see it. The way she had learned, a very long time ago, to do the things that needed to be done that were too large for an audience. Then she stopped. She wiped her face. She got up. She had a kingdom to get back to. Chapter 14. The Princess Returns. She arrived back in Aldenmoor on a Monday, which was, as she had always found, an appropriate day for reckoning. Sola met her at the east gate with a cloak, a horse, and the expression of a woman who had been holding an enormous amount of worry in a very small container for 4 months, and was prepared to release it the moment she had the opportunity. "You are alive," Sola said. "I am alive," Elara confirmed. "Your father has been." "I know. He sent 3 different search parties to 3 different." "I know. I told him you were fine every single day, and he did not believe me, and I was both right and entirely unable to prove it." "I know. I'm sorry." Elara took the cloak and put it around her shoulders. "I need a bath and clean clothes and 1 hour of privacy, and then I will see him. Tell him I am home." Sola looked at her face, all of it, with that careful, comprehensive gaze that had been seeing through Elara since they were children. "What did you find?" Sola asked quietly. Elara looked toward the palace. The fog was lifting from the valley. The river caught the light. "I found," she said, "that I was asking the wrong question." Her father received her in the council chamber, which told her something. If it had been the private sitting room, it would have been just a father. In the council chamber, it was a king as well. She had missed him enormously in ways she had refused to acknowledge while she was away, and now he was sitting across the table from her with the specific particular expression of a parent who has been very frightened and has resolved to be angry instead. She told him most of the truth. She told him where she had gone and why. She told him what she had observed. She told him that Prince Caelan was not a simple man, not the monster she had feared, not the convenient ally her father needed, but something genuinely complicated that deserved to be understood on its own terms. She told him about the king, Aldric, who was warm and thoughtful and who ran his kingdom with care. She told him about Emric and what Emric was, and how Emric's presence in the prince's life spoke to something about the prince's capacity that pure external observation would have missed entirely. She told him about the accusation and the dismissal. She told it plainly, without drama, in the tone of a person reporting facts. She did not tell him what she felt. She was not yet ready to tell anyone what she felt, including herself. Her father listened to all of it. He was very still while she spoke, the particular stillness of a king who is doing the difficult work of being also a father and is managing, imperfectly, to do both. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You were dismissed for something you did not do." "Yes." "And the prince did not defend you?" "No." A pause. He reviewed. He investigated as much as he was able. He could not find evidence that contradicted two witnesses. He made what was, from his position, a defensible decision. She looked at her father. It was still wrong. "Yes," her father said. "It was still wrong." He looked at the letter from Romavane, which was still on the council table, had, apparently, been there all this time, waiting. "The delegation from Romavane arrives in 6 weeks," he said, "to present the formal proposal. There will be a meeting, a formal introduction, between you and Prince Caelan." She looked at the letter, at the crowned wolf in the dark wax. "I know," she said. "Do you wish to refuse the introduction? We could find grounds. Health. Political realignment. There are always—" "No," she said. He looked at her. "I want to meet him," she said. "As myself. I want him to see me clearly. And I want to see whether he is," she paused, "whether what I think is there is actually there. Or whether I was deceived by proximity and the particular loneliness of spending 4 months as somebody else." Her father was quiet for another moment. "Elara," he said gently, "did you fall in love with him?" She looked at her hands. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I think I might be capable of it, which is enough to want to know the truth." He reached across the table and covered her hands with his. "Then we will receive the delegation," he said, "and you will meet him properly, as a princess, and we will see what he is made of." She squeezed his hand. "We will see," she agreed. Chapter 15, Renunciation. 3 weeks before the Aldenmoor delegation was due to arrive, Prince Caelan stood in his father's private study and said the words that had been building in him for 3 months like water behind a dam. "I will not marry the Princess of Aldenmoor." King Aldric looked at his son over the rim of his reading spectacles. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He looked, Caelan thought, the way he always looked when he had already anticipated a problem and was waiting to see whether the problem would arrive in the form he expected. "Sit down," his father said. Caelan sat. He sat the way he always sat, straight, contained, giving nothing away to the architecture of his own posture. But his father had known him for 28 years and was probably, Caelan was aware, not fooled. "Tell me," his father said. He had not been able to sleep. This was the beginning of the honest answer. He had not been able to sleep since the morning he had watched a maid with pale gray eyes and no fear walk out of his palace gate with her bag on her shoulder and the straight-backed composure of someone determined not to let him see that it was costing her anything. He had made a mistake. He understood this with the cold, surgical clarity he applied to all things when it was too late for the clarity to be useful. He had been given a version of events. He had reviewed. He had been unable to disprove the version. And he had acted on the version rather than on what he knew. What he actually knew from 4 months of watching, from 4 months of being argued with and seen clearly and treated by this one infuriating person, as though she were not afraid of him, and he should perhaps be more interesting than that, rather than on what he had been told. He had dismissed her. He had been reviewing that decision, with the ruthless self-accounting that was the only form of self-examination he knew, every day since. He had interviewed Gina. He had interviewed Marta. He had interviewed, carefully and methodically, every person who had been present in the South Corridor on the day in question. And the more he reviewed, the more he found a story that was slightly too clean, slightly too specific, slightly too perfectly arranged. The The way a lie is when it has been constructed by people who are good at constructing things, but do not fully account for the fact that truth has a texture that fabrication lacks. She had been telling the truth. He had known, he admitted now, in the part of himself that dealt in knowing, from the moment she had looked at him in the council wing corridor and said, "I am telling you the truth right now." He had known. And he had chosen the easier thing, the manageable thing, the thing that did not require him to overturn the verdict of 2 witnesses on the strength of a maid's claim. And he had watched her walk out of his palace, and he had told himself it was the correct decision, and he had not slept since. He told his father none of this. He was not capable of it yet. What he said was, "I am not prepared to build a marriage on a foundation of performance. A political introduction in which the princess will wear her best clothes and I will wear mine, and we will say the correct things to each other, and both pretend we are not making a deal." "I am not," he stopped. "I cannot commit to that." His father was quiet for a long time. "You have not met her," he said finally. "I know. You have formed a strong opinion about someone you have never spoken to." "I have formed a strong opinion," Caelan said, "about what I want. Or rather," he looked at his hands, "about what I no longer want." Another long silence. "Emric tells me," his father said carefully, "that you have not been yourself since the maid was dismissed." Caelan said nothing. "He says," his father continued in the same careful tone, "that you reviewed the situation 17 times and interviewed everyone involved, and that the result of your review is that you believe she was innocent." "Yes," Caelan said, "and that you did nothing with that conclusion." "There was nothing I could do," he said. "She was gone. I didn't know where she had gone." He stopped again. He was running up against the wall of his own vocabulary. "I did not know how to find someone I had lost when I did not have the right to have had them in the first place." His father took off his reading spectacles and set them on the desk. "Tell me about her," the king said, very quietly, "not as a maid, as a person." And Caelan, who had not spoken about this to anyone, who had guarded it with the same ferocious privacy he applied to everything that mattered, found, to his immense surprise and discomfort, that he was talking. He told his father about the corridor and the baseboards, and that first cold flat voice of his own meeting a silence that did not flinch. He told him about the letters and the argument and the explanation he had given because she had been right about needing it. He told him about Bess and the rug, and the way she had walked into his study to defend someone she did not have to defend. He told him about the library. He told him about pale gray eyes and the particular quality of a mind that looked at things directly and was not frightened by what it found there. He told his father, in the halting, slightly destroyed language of a man who has been keeping something sealed for too long, that he had been more known by this person in 4 months than he had felt known by anyone in 28 years, and that he had thrown it away, and that he could not make himself be sorry about all the rest of it if he could not first be sorry about that. His father listened to all of it. Then the king put his spectacles back on and picked up a piece of paper from his desk. "The Aldenmoor delegation arrives in 3 weeks, he said. "Father." "Receive them," the king said. "That is all I am asking. Receive them. Meet the princess. And then, whatever happens, you will at least have honored the invitation." Caelan looked at his father for a long moment. "And if I cannot go through with it? Then you will tell me that," his father said, "and we will find another way. But first, receive them." He looked at his son over the spectacles. "The world is full of surprising things, Caelan. You of all people should have learned by now not to decide what you will find before you have found it." Caelan said nothing, but he did not argue. He had a great many things left to learn from his father. Chapter 16, The Meeting. The Aldenmoor delegation arrived on a Thursday. Elara dressed that morning with Sola's help in absolute silence. The gown was deep blue, the color of the Aldenmoor crest, formal in every thread, the kind of gown that communicated everything about rank and lineage without a word being said. Her hair was done elaborately, pinned and arranged by Sola with the precision of someone preparing not just a woman, but a statement. The circlet, the formal one, not the small silver ring she wore in her father's private rooms, but the real one, the one that had been in the Aldenmoor royal house for 200 years, was placed on her head with careful hands. She looked in the mirror. A princess looked back. "You look like yourself," Sola said. "I feel strange," Elara said. "You are the same person you were yesterday." "I know. It's the other people's perception that feels strange." She touched the circlet. "He has never seen me. He has seen Lena. He does not know." "He is about to," Sola said. The formal reception hall was full when they entered. Her father's court in its finest. The advisors, the lords, the diplomatic staff, all the assembled weight of Aldenmoor's public face. Across from them, the delegation from Romavane, 20 people in the deep gray of Romavane's formal colors. The crowned wolf emblem, the heavy, certain architecture of a kingdom that had been powerful for a very long time. She came into the room with her father, on his right side, and walked to the center of the hall. She looked across the room. Prince Caelan of Romavane was standing very still in the middle of the delegation, in formal gray, with the particular contained composure that she knew better than anyone else in this room had reason to. He was looking at the Aldenmoor royals as they entered. At her father. Then at her. She watched the moment he saw her. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no visible collapse of composure, no stagger, no theatrics. He was far too controlled for that. But she had spent 4 months learning the geography of his stillness, and she saw it, the precise, specific shift in his expression, not in the muscles of his face, but somewhere deeper than that, in the quality of light behind his eyes, the recognition, the disbelief, and beneath both of those, something that landed in her chest like a fist. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away and followed the protocol of the formal introduction, which required her to stand beside her father while the two kings greeted each other, and listened to the formal words of alliance and proposed union, and received the Romavane delegation with the measured warmth that royalty used in lieu of real emotion at public events. She did all of this correctly, but her hands were shaking, slightly, inside the wide sleeves of her gown, and she was grateful that the sleeves were wide. The formal private meeting came an hour later, in the smaller council room off the main hall, which had been arranged for exactly this. The first private conversation between the two young royals, witnessed by their advisors and by Emric, who was seated near the window with the expression of a man holding a great many things very carefully. She sat across from Caelan. He looked at her. She had prepared, on the long journey from Aldenmoor, for many versions of this moment. She had prepared for him to be cold, to be formal, to meet her with the flat, certain voice behind which everything lived at such a distance. She had prepared for him to pretend. She had half prepared for him to accuse her. That was the word, wasn't it, for what she had done from one angle. The word could be called a kind of deception, dressed up as something more reasonable. She had not prepared for the silence. He looked at her for a long moment in that silence. The advisors were there, but they were background. Emric was there, and she dared not look at him. And then Caelan said, in the quietest voice she had ever heard from him, a voice she had not known he was capable of, "I owe you an apology." The room held its breath. She did not speak. She waited. "I reviewed the matter," he said, "after you left. 17 times, across every account available to me. And I came to a conclusion that I reached too late and could not act on because I did not know." He stopped. "I did not know who you were, where to find you, how to." Another stop. She could see what it was costing him, this speaking. She had never seen it cost him anything before, and the sight of it cost her something in return. "I dismissed you for something you did not do," he said. "And I knew it. I chose the easier thing, and the easier thing was wrong, and I'm sorry." In the silence that followed, she heard one of the advisors shift in their chair. She looked at Caelan, at the face she had spent 4 months learning, at the eyes that were looking at her without the sealed composure, without the defended distance, with something that was simply him. Simply the person she had found in a library, in the lamplight, and had been foolish enough to start to love. "There is something I owe you as well," she said. "An explanation at minimum. And possibly an apology of my own, though I reserve the right to argue about the extent of it." Something happened in his face. The corners of his eyes moved, very slightly. She had never seen that happen before. "I came to Romavane before the formal introduction," she said, and her voice was steady, and she was Elara, fully and completely herself, for the first time in 4 months. "I came as a maid, because I did not want to marry a man I did not know. I wanted to know you first, as you actually are, not as you would present yourself to a visiting princess." She held his gaze. "I understand if that is." "You were in my library," he said. "Yes." "Reading histories of the northern kingdoms." "Yes." "And you told me your father was—" A pause, and the corners of his eyes did the thing again. "A better father than a king." "I stand by that assessment," she said. "He is. It is one of his better qualities." From the window, she heard Emric make a sound that was very carefully controlled, but was undeniably, at its core, a laugh. Caelan looked at her for a very long time. "You were not frightened of me," he said. "Fear is not useful," she said. Another very long time. No, he said. It isn't. He looked at his hands. Then at her. Then at his hands again, in the specific way of a person doing something difficult that they have not done before. I would like, he said very quietly, to start again, if you would allow that. She looked at the circlet on her head. She could feel its weight. She looked at the room, at the advisors, at the formal apparatus of royalty and alliance and the decisions made for people by forces larger than themselves. Then she looked at him. I have conditions, she said. He waited. You will learn the names of your household staff, she said. All of them. You will manage your household with the same rigor you bring to everything else, but you will manage it as a person who understands that functions are performed by people, and that people are not only their functions. A pause. Yes, he said. You will listen, she said, when someone tells you the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient, even when it is delivered by someone without rank or power to enforce it. Yes, he said. And, she said, you will accept that I will always tell you when you are wrong. The room was very quiet. I am aware, he said, that I am not good at being wrong. No, she said. You are not. You're going to have to get better at it. He looked at her for a long, long moment. I understand, he said, that this will be a condition of the arrangement. It will be a condition of knowing me, she said. Arrangement or not. He was quiet again, and then he nodded. A single, deliberate nod, the kind that means I have heard you and I understand, and I am choosing this. From the window, Emric made no sound at all, but she could feel him not making it. Chapter 17. The beginning of what comes after. The formal signing of the alliance documents happened 3 days later. In between, there were dinners and conversations and the slow, careful business of two royal families adjusting their image of each other in the light of reality. King Aldric came to Aldenmoor for the first time in 12 years and sat beside King Doran at the long table and talked for 4 hours about things that were not, primarily political, about their respective sons and daughters, about the kingdoms they had built and the ones they had inherited and the complicated, irreducible question of what you owe to the people who come after you. They got along, as it turned out, with the uncomplicated ease of two people who had been waiting, without knowing it, for someone to talk to. Lord Emric arrived and was received by Elara's court with the kind of warmth that he received everywhere he went, which was to say immediately and completely. Sola met him on the second day, and they spent an entire afternoon in the library talking about something Sola refused to disclose, which Elara chose to find encouraging. And Caelan. Caelan was not easy. He was not transformed. He would not have been himself if he had been. He was, in the formal settings, precisely what he always was: contained, measured, exact. He asked the correct questions at the diplomatic meetings and listened to the answers with that particular concentrated attention that, she now understood, was not coldness but the opposite of it. He did not perform warmth. He was not warm in the way most people were warm. But he was present, in the way that he had not been, in the palace in Varenhal, until the storm night in the corridor and the library and the terrible, broken weeks of her dismissal. He was present with her specifically, in the careful, deliberate way of a man who has decided to learn a new language and is applying himself to it with the same rigor he applies to everything. On the afternoon of the second day, he found her in the garden. Not her palace's roses. It was too cold for roses. But the winter garden, the one her mother had designed 30 years ago with stones and gray-green plants that survived the cold and the particular skeletal beauty of ornamental grasses against white sky. He sat on the bench across from her. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, the head of household in Romavane. Mistress Vora. She failed to act on your report of the rug in the east study. Elara looked at him. I am telling you this, he said, so that you know I reviewed it. Every element. Not because I needed the confirmation, I had already concluded, but because I wanted to know exactly what had been done and by whom and what the failure was at every stage. She was quiet. Gina and Marta are no longer in the palace's employ, he said. Lissa has been moved to the outer household with a notation on her record. Bess has been promoted to senior position in the East Wing. She thought about Bess, 20 years old, crying in the linen room. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Then, after a pause, the baseboards in the East Corridor are no longer streaking. Something expanded in her chest. Something warm and aching and completely involuntary. Good, she said. He looked at the winter garden. She looked at it too. The grasses moved very slightly in the cold air. Somewhere above the wall, The sky was the color of pewter and still and very large. I did not know, he said very quietly, that a person could make so much difference in the composition of a place. I have spent a long time believing that palaces run on systems and structures and the correct application of standards. And then someone comes into them and he stopped. He was doing the thing again, the difficult thing. And the palace is different. And you notice when it changes back. She looked at him. He was looking at the grasses. His profile was very still. She had learned, over 4 months, to read the space between his sentences, and she read this one carefully. I noticed, he said. When you were gone. I noticed. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, so did I. He turned to look at her. And she let him look fully, in the way she had rarely allowed herself in the palace, in the way that she had learned to withhold as a measure of protection, because looking was revealing and revealing was dangerous. She let him look. He looked. And whatever passed between them in that winter garden, on that cold afternoon with the pewter sky above and the ornamental grasses moving in the air and the sound of 2 kingdoms negotiating their future somewhere in the building behind them, whatever it was not the arranged thing, the convenient thing, the thing that had been planned and signed and sealed. It was not the performance. It was the thing beneath the performance. The thing that had been building, without their knowledge or permission, in corridors and libraries and storm-dark passages and gardens, for 4 months before either of them had the right words for it. She thought of Sola in the library at midnight asking, what name will you take? She thought of the candles in the triangle. One for what you know, one for what you don't, one for what you're afraid to find out. She reached out in the winter garden and took his hand. His fingers were cold. He looked down at their hands with an expression she could not name. Surprise, and something older than surprise, something that had been waiting for a long time to be acknowledged. He did not pull away. His fingers, after a moment, closed around hers. You are going to be, he said very quietly, an extraordinarily difficult person to be married to. Yes, she said. I am. A pause. Good, he said. Above them, the pewter sky held. The grasses moved. The cold was present and real and entirely bearable.